The sun has left and forgotten me.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. When I think about story, I think about how it impacts us in a physiological way. I've been reading more and more research from psychologists and bioengineers that are showing the connection between the release of oxytocin and serotonin, those feel-good brain chemicals, when we are experiencing story together. So it makes it even more important that we are aware of what the stories are that we're sharing and how they change our internal messages and the way that we're perceived by other people. But B, it's even more important to consider why you're sharing the story. What do you want this person to know about you? What do you want this person to think, feel, or do at the end of the conversation? And what stories do you want to unlock in the person in front of you? If you're curious about working with me with job interviewing or public speaking, please reach out at elkinsconsulting.com. Today's episode is such a special treat for me. I've known Gina Riley for years on LinkedIn, and this is the first time we're recording a podcast. And listeners, you are in for such a treat. This woman is thoughtful, considerate, and extremely knowledgeable when it comes to career coaching, career paths, interviewing, all the job search stuff that you need to know. So Gina, thank you so much for joining me today.
We're blushing. Thank you. I feel equally as giddy about getting together with you today.
Yay. So listeners, we talked for a few minutes before I hit record so that we could make sure that we were on the same page about what we wanted to accomplish, because the stories you tell matter. But we kind of got sidetracked into all this conversation about music and how we use music in our lives, the way we've rediscovered certain kinds of music. And I'm sure that will come up during our conversation. But let's get started with the question that I love to ask my guests, which is, can you share something about yourself that most people probably don't know about you? Something that's not on your resume or your bio or your LinkedIn profile. Because when we have some other part of you that we're aware of, it helps give people multi-dimensions of knowledge of a person. We have a tendency these days to anchor people by one interaction that we have with them. So I would love to give more context here. Gina, what do you think?
I love it. One thing that is not on my bio that when I share it with people, they seem surprised, is that my why and my career journey, how I arrived here today, started when I was 15 or 16 years old in high school. And it took me 3 times to get on the student council, and I finally made it because I wasn't the most popular girl in the school, but I really wanted to make a difference and I wanted to be a part of the action, making things happen at school, which led me to some leadership development types of programs that I got to participate in. So at 15, I went to a big conference where only one person from my high school got to go. I was the one. And it opened me up to public speaking. It opened me up to leadership concepts. And then the subsequent 2 years, I entered into a program called All Stars, where this group of people went all around the country, and it was the era of just say no to drugs.
So yes.
It was great. So they went around and they took 50 students from the 3 rival high schools in my district and took us on a retreat for a whole weekend. And we got intensive programming about communication skills, relationship skills, how to show up as our true authentic selves when we would talk with our friends, with our parents. Lots of tears, lots of real emotion. You have all these like hormones and all these teenagers uncovering and unlocking what's inside. And I started to realize that the feelings that I was having in making real connection was the place I wanted to live in. And so my entire career journey started with the influence from these men and women that came through And then I became a trainer the next year and I got to be on stage with them and lead some things. And so my whole career path has been basically in communication.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I would not have known that. So many of us go through ebbs and flows and figuring things out, developing our clarity over time. So to hear that you had that influence and impact at 15 and 16 years old is really extraordinary. I've heard of people getting on that path through a medical experience, and so they become a doctor. They know at a very young age they want to be a doctor, or a legal experience where they know at a young age they want to be an attorney. But I rarely hear what you just told me of your story. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I think that understanding our own why, and I'm not going right to the Simon Cynic material, which is great, but truly just getting anchored in the thing that motivates us deep down to push forward in life. And for me, it's ultimately showing up with clear communication for myself, but to help others articulate their stories, as you do as well, is helping other people unlock and uncover the why and the how, which plays back to StrengthsFinder and why we're here today, so that they can show up authentically and tell their stories with power.
Yes, all of that. And I have found that when we understand that motivation, we can take it with us wherever we sit.
Yes.
Have you found that as well? So it took me into my 40s, well into my 40s, to finally see the pattern of the how leading to the why. I brought myself to all of those situations, but I didn't understand necessarily on a conscious level what I was bringing to each of those situations. And it was my desire for people to feel safe and understood enough to be able to bring their whole self to whatever they were doing. And that's even part of my book, the fact that I didn't consider the clarity of a why until I understood the pattern of my how.
I couldn't nod my head more vigorously right now. My head will shake off my shoulders. I 1,000% agree with you. And that I think that's why we bring this passion to our work, is that anchoring. And other coaches may come from a different angle and have success with their clients. For me, that I'm anchored in that same place. And I have a story. I'm working with someone right now who is a director level at one of the largest tech companies in the world. And when she's originally from India, lives in the United States, and her core of why she puts what she has into building some of the best products and services in the world that many of us use. The core is people, when she was growing up, people would go to the train station at 4 a.m. to get their tickets because they had to. That's how they had to do it, to get that ticket to go where they needed to go every day. And she said, I got to see technology come into play where they shaved off hours of their time so that they could buy that stuff online, and then their lives would be better. And so when I moved to America and I got my master's degree and I started to see the impact and the power of products and services on small businesses, I want to make people's lives better in the entrepreneurial space, in the small business space. And she's so clear on why she wants, to continue doing this and why she wants to make a transition to something from a big company to a smaller company to make an impact on small businesses.
Because she understands that small businesses are what drive individuals more than large businesses.
Yeah.
And it sounds like she wants to help individuals, not like the corporate cog, right?
Exactly.
So when you think about your why, can you look back at, I don't know, a couple of different jobs that you had that you were using your why? Here's where I'm going with this. I think a lot of people, our listeners, may not understand what I mean by the how. And so when I think about that, I think about a few different examples of creating space when I was the president of the Women's Leadership Network here in Helena, Montana. and creating environments at events and meetings where the women in this group, the women in our community, could really see themselves and acknowledge the value that they bring. And I loved creating that environment. So I did that. And then I did this workshop on storytelling for a group of Arbonne women that were running their own businesses, but this was a retreat for them. And that same environment was created, but it was a completely different situation. And the purpose of collecting people in the room was completely different. And then I had my No Longer Virtual event that same year. And I remember having all these people together and watching them walk into the room and hug each other, people they'd only ever met online. And the room was filled with this warmth and generosity and learning, deep, relevant learning for our businesses. And I remember after those 3 events coming back to it and realizing, oh, it's the environment that I'm creating. It's all about the environment that I'm creating and how I'm doing that with feeding people, making sure that they feel like they are welcome, that they're being hosted, that they are contributing, because you can't have community without people contributing. So what about you? What are your some of those stories from your how that you were able to use your why, but in really different environments?
That's a great question. One thing that brought us together today in particular, you and I were going back and forth on a post about StrengthsFinder. And so I draw back to the how we do what we do is through our strengths, our natural strengths, how we naturally show up in the world. And it's very difficult not to show up with those. And for me, I have 3 rare strengths in my top 5. And so to answer your question, I show up with activator as number 1. No matter what room I'm in, I am going to be activating myself or activating other people. So, we can look at this time and again throughout my history. And then my second...
One second.
Yeah.
For our listeners, activator is when you have a constant sense of urgency. That's the activator. So you have to be moving, you have to be doing something. And the reason it's in the influencing domain is because I'll give an example. I can't tell you how many people have said, I never would have done that if it wasn't for you. That's the activator. All right, go on.
Completely. So I'm going to turn it on its head now. Number 2 for me is focus, which is also a rare strength. So I've got...
That's really an unusual combination.
Exactly. And when I first, so I'm a UMAP, UMAP certified coach, and it's a combination of strengths, your top values, your motivated skills, and your personality. There's a personality assessment. And so when I was
Kristen Sherry.
With Kristen Sherry, yes.
Okay.
And when I started unpacking my strengths, I really struggled with, am I an activator or am I focused? Because I'm so hyper focused. So it doesn't mean that I don't have that attention deficit creep in, and especially with social media and all the things of modern technology that distracts us. However, when I am in my zone, when I've been writing a book all in 2024, people can come talk to me and I pretend like I'm listening and I'm like, okay, and now they're gone. I am like completely on what I'm doing. When I'm working with a client, I am activating them with extreme focus on their stories. So that is what I'm bringing to the party. And then how I'm doing what I'm doing is with my top 3 strength, which is individualization. It's not super rare.
I love that.
I am able to unpack people's stories because I see every single person as unique and distinct. So all the questions I'm asking you before we get even on with our recording, I'm learning and listening and really reading your room on, how you show up as an artist, as a singer, what energizes you, what motivates you, what your environment is like, all these things, your stories about leading workshops and so on. All those things matter to me. And that is how it influences my story, the storytelling I help people do. And then I'm going to knock your socks off here. I have a 3rd rare strength, which is significance. That's my number 4. So how I do what I do is bringing out truly the significant things about each individual with the individualization, with extreme focus to help activate them to take action on their career journey, whatever that is.
What an amazing collection of strengths. What's your number 5?
Number 5 is restorative. And it's kind of like, yeah.
No, I love restorative. Oh, it's one of my favorites. So
yeah, I'm polishing it up. I'm polishing up the story. And, the best coaching days is when I get to week 4 and I have helped people build up what I call the UVP, the unique value proposition, unpacking their UMAP with their strengths and values in particular, their leadership approach in week 2. Week 3, I'm unpacking the career story and I'm identifying the themes and the patterns in their career. When I read back the synthesis on week 4, it's not unusual for people to grab a
cry. Of course, because they've never seen themselves in that light of that beauty.
Exactly, because it's hard to read the label when you are inside of the jar.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so 2 things that came up. One is for our listeners, the individualization. This is somebody that you know or you who is an uncanny gift giver. If you are a gift giver and you are the person that can always pick exactly the right thing, you probably have individualization in your top talents. And you have a ridiculously strong bullshit meter. So sometimes individualization can be very intimidating to other people because you see right through them. And the beauty in individualization is that somebody who is using it to find what makes you magic, they are going to find a seriously unique part of you that you won't recognize because, like Gina said, you can't see it from inside. Mm-hmm. The other one is the restorative, which is a person who likes to start from scratch. It's in the executing domain, which means that this is a builder that has a methodical approach to building. This is somebody that you know that if you give them a puzzle, they just dump out the whole box. They're not going to start picking through to find the corners and the edges. They're going to dump out the box and start from nothing. They're even going to separate the pieces that might still be together. That's a restorative. The way that I describe it is as quilters, because where I see a pile of scraps, a quilter sees a beautiful mosaic. They see the potential for something that's broken or underperforming to be meaningful. And so what I love about this combination for you is exactly what you've pulled from it. So the other thing that came up for me was I find that sometimes, and the crying thing, when you read it back to them and say, this is what I hear in you, this is what I see in you. I find that a lot of times people, especially women sometimes, will get hostile when they first read their results. And what I found is that that's because those talents, those things that make you uniquely you, are the things that other people don't understand and have criticized you for. And in some cases, mercilessly. So tell me about that.
This is where you and I began this conversation on LinkedIn about 2 months ago or something. And what I would say is the nuance is it's oftentimes those of us with those rare strengths in the bottom quartile. And the reason why we may have gotten brutally and mercifully, put upon, criticized for those. Thank you. The word escaped me. See, Sarah,
we're women of a certain age. It's just
we're right there together, swimming in the pool. But it's because the people that don't have those rare strengths find it difficult to recognize it in themselves because there are more people with other strengths that, feel like number 1 is achiever. Number 1 out of 34 strengths is achiever. That means there's a lot of achievers and people can recognize that in each other. However, it's going to be much more difficult for someone to identify with the activator and the focus that I have. Like being like criticized growing up, Gina, why are you so tunnel vision? Gina, can't you just ... look up and do these other things or multitask or what have you? Or can you slow your roll? Can you just calm down? right? So a person with activator and focus cannot naturally just calm down and naturally not be hyper focused on what they see as important. And with the number 4 of significance, to not work on the most important thing that they think is impactful to them or other people. I cannot not do that.
Right. Right. And I feel that because I have command in my top talents, and that is highly unusual. It's in the bottom quartile.
It's 34. It's the last one.
Yeah. It's the least likely for, is that just the US or is that globally?
I don't know. It's according to
the US.
The Gallup, the Gallup website. And that's what I coach on. And I've had a few people with command. And what is fascinating to me is those with command, the way that they show up is all based on the other 4 strengths that is in combination with it. So some can show up with quite a bit of arrogance and being a know-it-all. However, with some other kinds of strengths, maybe it's the relating themes, it softens how they're showing up with command, but they just have the presence and the charisma. It's
so
funny.
You just,
go ahead.
You just pinpointed exactly why I really appreciate this particular tool. Because it doesn't put people in a box. It's not a label. It's not you are an introvert or you are an extrovert. It is you are a complex human being, and this is the way you approach problems. This is the way you approach building relationships, and it's complicated. And so, yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, no. You and I could talk about this for hours and hours. Like, just like my neurons are like on fire right now. When I first got certified with the UMAP, I used my family as guinea pigs because, we have to practice with our tool before we go and work with the client.
Absolutely. They require it to be a Gallup certified strengths coach. You have to practice. You have to have multiple hours of practice.
Exactly. So I started with my then 17-year-old son. He was my first customer. And he was also applying to college at the time. So we go through his StrengthsFinder, and we had a really rough upbringing. Like he was definitely, challenging. But until I had him do the StrengthsFinder, I didn't understand exactly why. And he has command in his top 5 and restorative. And he's constantly ideating and he's super creative. If I had understood that about him sooner, I know I would have been a better parent. I would have been more compassionate. It wouldn't have been as combative. Now I have more compassion for what he must feel in life as he moves through the world. But the other beautiful thing about using the UMAP and the StrengthsFinder is he applied the language that came out of his strengths and his values and applied it toward his college applications. Why are you unique and special, Addison? And he was able to, write. He knew, he goes, it's all right here in my UMAP. Like I know exactly what I do well. And he is sort of a called forth leader. Like he has a compass that is quite strong. Could it be wrong sometimes? Sure. He's 22. He doesn't know everything.
Tell me about it.
Right? But the maturity that he's gaining over time as he becomes an adult, is an adult now, is the awareness to check his assumptions.
Yes, right? Absolutely. I love how you're putting that. I also made my kids take the assessment, the StrengthsFinder, and my husband and my brother, my sister, my mom all took it. And I put us on a grid so that I could see where the patterns and gaps were in our family. And it's such a practical tool. I am such a practical person. I hated assessments until I discovered StrengthsFinder. Our listeners have heard me say that so many times because they were used to label me, because they were almost, in some cases, weaponized against me. I was called bossy. Oh, that's why you're so bossy. And yes, I can be very specific about what my needs are. And the thing is, there was a mistake there when people called me controlling. I am not controlling. You would never hear anyone in my current circle call me controlling. Bossy, yeah, but not controlling. But the bossiness comes from this, I cannot tolerate chaos. And when I perceive chaos, I insert myself. The difference now maybe it's age or a combination of age and better understanding of what command is. The difference is that the way I present that command has changed dramatically. So yeah, I still, in front of my mom and a few other people, I still can come across the way that I did in my 20s and 30s. The difference now is that I use my strategic and my adaptability and my ideation to shift the way that my command is showing up. I'm not changing who I am.
Right.
I'm not suddenly tolerating chaos. I'm just approaching it differently. And I describe it as an amplifier, and I'm turning down the dial on my command. I would never turn it below a 5. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's never going to go below a 5, or I'm going to walk away feeling slimed, drained, a little vomit in my throat, right? Because I can't do that. But if I turn that down to a 5, I can manage the other ones differently. By the way, I have to give credit where credit is due. It was Lisa Cummings, who is also a musician and a StrengthsFinder coach, that I talked to probably over 2 years ago on this podcast. And she's the one that said, imagine an amplifier. And I've been using that ever since.
I love that. I heard a really cool way to use the tool from Dana Williams, who's a leadership coach, StrengthsFinder coach. And she asked this question: what would happen if you used your top 5 strengths on yourself? What would that look like? And because I'm a coach helping people with their stories and leadership transition, my focus is outward a lot of the time. But then I started thinking, how do I activate myself? How do I focus on myself or my needs, et cetera? And it's very cool to talk to other StrengthsFinder coaches, because you get these little tiny nuggets and nuances that we can be applying, in our.
So tell me a time when you recently did that, because I do that often. I did it when I was trying to write my book, and my activator and adaptability were making it really, I don't have focus. It's at the bottom of my list. So I had to coach myself. So tell me about how you have coached yourself using that perspective.
I'm not sure if I have done it in a cognizant way. It might be just defaulting to my natural strengths of activator focus, because all of 2024, I was writing a book and I had to gut it out. And I made a household move. We sold our home of 20 years and moved while I was trying to write the book. And I'm a parent. My husband changed jobs. It was a massive year of change. It was positive change, but it was very stressful. So I invested in creating the book. I paid a lot of money to have the edit team that I have and all the stuff. So I owe it to myself and my family. And so the focus had to be there. I really didn't feel like I had a choice. I couldn't let it go.
Right.
So that's a hard question for me to answer right now, Sarah, because I think it came so naturally to go and hole up and try to gut out a chapter, Yeah,
I totally understand that. My example is that when I was trying to follow other people's guidance about writing a book, and everything you read, whether article, podcast, books, whatever, everything you read that gives you advice about writing at all, but especially writing a book, is all about routine. Everything. I've never seen anything that didn't involve routine. And I have adaptability and activator. Routine isn't even a word in my vocabulary. So none of that worked. And anytime I would try to make myself do it, I was using other people's tools. Yeah, the things at the bottom of my list, I was using other people's tools to try to write a book that had to be inspiring to me and to readers, hopefully. And I remember this moment of feeling pathetic. Like, why can't I do this? I know it's in me. Why am I having such a hard time just sitting down and writing? And anytime I'd sit down to write, it just wouldn't be inspired, because I'd be forcing myself to hammer it out. And I'd have to rewrite whatever I wrote. And it was one of those moments where I was feeling really shitty about myself. Like, really bad. And I looked up I have my strengths listed in front of me on my wall in front of my desk. And I thought, okay, Sarah, if you were coaching somebody with these talents to write a book, what are some of the strategies that you would help them come up with?
Mm.
And I literally coached myself, like, okay, what strategies? If I was coaching somebody else, and I realized I ended up scheduling 15-minute increments throughout my week on my calendar, because if it's not on my calendar, I don't do it. 15-minute increments throughout my calendar. Might be 9 a.m. one day, it might be 11 p.m. the next day, it might be noon the day after that, but it's just blocked out of my calendar. And once I stuck with that, I finished my book in like 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But I had to, as you said, approach it with coaching myself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's so many neat nuances that we can extract from the Strengths Finder. And I also say in combination with our values.
Of course.
And what's so helpful for people, particularly who are job seekers and they're trying to tap into that uniqueness. I think there's been so many people that we have all known in our ecosystems that have been laid off. So if you're one of a couple thousand people getting laid off from a big company and you're looking to your right and left going, goodness, there's a whole bunch of us that have the same skill set or toolkit.
Right.
I challenge that person to, take a really reflective look at what it is that you do actually uniquely do, how you uniquely apply your toolkit in the world, because that is the foundation of your storytelling. And that is where the power, the believability, the authenticity will come from.
Mm. I have to ask, when was the last time you had to apply for a job?
You can't even count. I'm a dinosaur. You can't count that far back. I mean, yeah, it's not a modern time. So, my story is I worked for Intel for about a decade in recruitment. I got a master's degree in whole systems design so I could become an HR business partner. And I was in training and development, and I ran our Oregon intern program. I hired 400 interns in 1 year back in the day. But I took a 15-year break to raise 2 sons, because my husband and I are both in corporate and we just couldn't attend to the kids in the same way. So I stepped back, and 15 years later, I joined up with Talents Group, an executive search firm, with my friend Sherry Kitsowen, who is the CEO, and we worked together at Intel. So she was my entree back in. And this is why networking and relationships are so vital to career transition success. I didn't need to apply for a job. I already had proof with her that I could do the kind of work she needed to have done. And then later, a number of years later, I launched Gina Riley Consulting with my career coaching, work.
Right.
So I haven't had to apply for a job. And it is also why I believe in the power of relationships and of thought leadership.
Yes, absolutely. There's so much here in my head right now that I want to share and ask you. I remember when I was applying for my last job, which was I took the job in, I want to say January of 2013, and then left the W-2 world, hopefully for good, but who knows? I'm adaptable. So I don't know, a couple of years I might decide something else. But I remember applying for the job, and the reason I got that job was because of the story that I told. And I had this selection committee that interviewed me, and 2 of the people told me later that this is what differentiated me in that market. And yes, I did know a few people that worked there, but none of them were on my hiring committee.
Right.
So and Helena's a really small town, and it's the state capital of Montana. So it can be really hard to get a job because it's one of the hardest pools, because there's more higher education level in this city than in most of the cities in Montana. And it's hard. But I was thinking about how you build those relationships, because a lot of people with talents that are different from mine, I have woo as number 6. So I make relationships pretty quickly, and I love people in general.
Yeah.
When I'm working with my clients who are looking for a job and helping them with the job interview storytelling aspect of interviews, one of the things that we talk about is how do you use your talents to build relationships that are going to be meaningful? And part of that is making sure you have the stories that demonstrate your values and your skills. So what are your thoughts on that? I would love to hear your perspective on that.
I'll answer that question with a story because I think it's one of the best ways to describe it. So recently, I just had a client land with a big global company that was on his target list, and he had no connections internally into this global company. He had been laid off from a major brand. We were working together and we did all the strengths finder and storytelling, and it was all set. And he identified an opportunity at this big company. And so he sent a cold email he figured out who the hiring manager was. And he used his developer in him and the connection that they both had in their LinkedIn profiles to kind of start the conversation, which was, hey, I noticed your job and I have already applied. I'd love to have a conversation. I see we have a few things in common. We both worked in Japan, where you may have had similar experiences where you had to really adapt to the culture in order to advance business, the business objectives, and not, with an American approach going in and form-fitting into a culture that's collaborative or, what have you. So he was basically saying, I am accustomed to navigating new situations and building relationships that lead to an incredible outcome. I could apply that at your company as well. He makes it into the interview process. And what we found out 4 months later, these are all these leadership roles, it's at least 4 months of interviews. He gets the job offer. He's moving to that state now to take the job. And here's why he got it. And this is why he was told. He beat an internal candidate. Oh, yes, an internal candidate, because he demonstrated through the entire process with all the key players, he could develop relationships, he could develop people, and he would not be a culture disruptor. He would be a culture enhancer in building bridges in his leadership role cross-organizationally to advance the work. And he beat an internal candidate. I mean,
that's so unusual.
It's so inspiring. I wrote a Forbes article about it because beating the internal candidate, I mean, it goes both ways. Sometimes it's easy to beat an internal candidate. It just depends on the scenario. But in this case, I think that he swung for the fences and his story was straight. And he came back to me and he said, I got this job and I was told I got this job because we developed these stories that I was able to clearly communicate that I could help them get these results and help advance the people relationships. And I was like, yes. I mean, this is exactly why we do what we do, Sarah.
I just got to chill.
I know, me too.
It's just the best. It's just the best because developer is such so for our listeners, developer is a talent that it's one of the development talents that I describe. The restorative is a development talent because it builds something from scratch. The developer is in the relationship building talents because where restorative sees something as a 0 or -1, it's broken, they see the potential for it to be an 8. A developer sees something that's underperforming, a 2 or a 3, and they can see its potential to be an 8, to be a meaningful addition. And it's generally directed at people. And the reason it's in relationship building is because they love to celebrate and acknowledge incremental improvement. So for him to tell stories about how he developed people, developed a team, encouraged relationship building within the team and across boundaries that are normally siloed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the language he was using. And I love that story so much. Wow.
It just brought me so much joy when he came back and he was able to clearly say, like, it was so crystal clear, and again, encouraging people who are looking at future career transitions, tapping into this and solidifying this storytelling. You take it with you everywhere you go. I was working with another woman who's in she's a consultant in healthcare and the technology space. And when we unpacked her career story, what we identified, we actually identified her why. And her why was, I was in a traditional family, a mother, father, some siblings. My father passed away when I was only 11 from AIDS, and we found out he was a closeted gay man. And so throughout her life, she started realizing that if her father maybe had access to better health care and and information and statistics and whatnot, and this is back, we grew up in a similar time, right? AIDS was really prominent, a big issue in the 80s in particular. Her why that has led her to now working on a PhD, and she's our age. She's now working on a PhD in the technology space and is a consultant, all centered around advancing better data that we all will have access to so we can make better choices in our lives for our healthcare. And now when she shows up in any given room, she leads with the why. She doesn't necessarily say, my father died when I was 11, but she's very clear on why she's in that room. It's beautiful. And I wrote about this in my book. It's like she has a significant part of chapter 3, I think it is.
I can't wait to get my hands on that book.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. It's so powerful.
I love that. So when you think about your the way that you have processed information over the years, and you can associate all of that with your strengths, what is one time where things went sideways and you managed to maneuver around it? I always like to hear I won't call it a failure story because I don't really believe in failure. But things go sideways all the time. And how do we maneuver around that or navigate it?
Right. So kind of in the StrengthsFinder language, or at least from my UMAP coaching, it's like the barriers to success. It's like when we overuse our strengths or we don't have hyper awareness maybe about how we're showing up. And when I was younger, I could feel like, I'm going to say younger as in like I'm in my 20s. I could feel I was different in the room, but I wasn't quite, and I wasn't always landing with people. And so over time, as I matured and understood the power of tempering and controlling and modifying how I was communicating in different scenarios, I started to get better results. So I don't have one specific instance, but it's more of a whole time frame. In those early 20s, I met Intel in a very we had constructive confrontation. This is an environment where the underpinning in our communication was get issues out on the table, because if we let them sit and harbor, we may not advance the technology fast enough. We don't want anything to be buried. And so it was highly, I don't want to say combative, but we actually taught people how to talk with each other and have constructive confrontation.
Right. Without feeling defensive.
Exactly.
Because that's the biggest issue, is how do I tell you what I don't think is right without making you feel like I'm attacking you?
Exactly.
Right.
And being kind of an open, honest, straightforward, and hard-charging person, and type A, and I'm trying to fit in, and I'm this petite female, and I'm not technical, and I'm trying to get my way or advance my perspective so I could be successful. Achievers number 6.
Oh boy.
So I learned over time when I wasn't landing with people. I'm sitting with a validation engineer, and I'm using this as a label across a lot of people, but my experience with validation engineers is they're measured and thoughtful, and they're discerning, and they have discipline, and they have these traits and talents that I didn't necessarily show up with. So over time, I started to learn to ask, one, better questions about what they needed and their interests. And then the other thing that I think is so powerful about knowing your strengths is, I know I want to do activation, but if I am in relationship with a business partner who I can clearly read the room and see that they're not an activator, that I ask the kinds of questions that help us contract to move forward. So it would look like this. Hey, engineering manager, who's trying to hire 10 software engineers, I've got this method that I am proposing using, and I can see they have a reaction like, I don't know if that's going to work for me. Would you like 2 days to think about it, and we'll meet and we'll come back together and make a decision? Yes, thank you. Okay. So we can use these strengths that we have, and with hyper awareness about the barriers to success, meaning if I'm a ramrod activator, I'm not going to get what I want in this relationship. I'm not going to be successful if I don't consider where they're coming from, their why. And I don't even have to know their actual why, but I do kind of need to know their strengths in order to navigate the relationship and come out with a win for both of us.
Oh, I love that, because one of the arguments I had, it wasn't really an argument, but early on, one of my first team StrengthsFinder workshops was a guy said, well, I'm not going to change who I am just to fit somebody else's needs. And I said, I'm not asking you to change who you are. And then I said, have you ever been overseas? And he said, yeah. I said, where'd you go? He said, Germany. I said, do you speak German? He said, no. And I said, did you just go, or did you start to learn a few words? Did you learn some of the language before you got there? He said, well, yeah. I said, well, what words did you learn? Please, thank you, left, right, bathroom. What words did you learn? And he kind of told me, and I said, does that make you German? Now that you learned a few of the other people's language, a little bit of that language, are you suddenly German? And
but we're relating now. We're
right. So the whole room. I said, then why did you learn this language? He said, well, I have to get around. I have to communicate. I said, well, you have to do that at work too.
Brilliant. You're brilliant, Sarah. That was what a great way to allow someone the opportunity to see themselves in that story.
Thank you.
So good.
It's so important. Yes. And I know that we have such a similar why about communication and knowing how it improves people's lives and makes people more satisfied and more peaceful in some ways. So when you think about your top talents, I'm going to kind of pull this full circle and wrap it around. When you think about your top talents, what is something that you are especially grateful for? And in story, tell me about some time where one of your talents just showed up so beautifully that you realized and embraced it in a way that you maybe hadn't before.
I think before I actually became a coach using the StrengthsFinder, I didn't have words to describe how my individualization focus shows up. And even though I have activator focus, I actually see individualization as my superpower. And when I reflect back over time with the drawing in stories, I today, but can remember being that person sitting in a team meeting, and I am hyper aware of how people are positioning their bodies, their body language, their facial expressions, knowing them as I did individually. I'm the person that can see who just shrunk back because somebody cut them off, and no one else seems to be aware of it. And I have the superpower and ability to wait it out and then draw them back. I think that you still had something to say, Sam. Would you like an opportunity, so for me, I don't know if I have one single story. It's all the coaching stories where I'm putting together the story with my client and helping hold up that reflective mirror so that they can see their individual uniqueness with their unique value proposition. And I feel the most proud about my individualization. I'm not always right because I try to check my assumptions, because with maturity, we learn that we're not always right, but I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at reading the room.
What I found with women with individualization is that oftentimes they don't trust themselves because they don't want to appear biased. So I totally hear that, but I love—
If you check your assumptions, then you don't have to fall into the trap.
Exactly. I love that story so much. And I bet you could pick a specific moment in time when it really showed up for you in a positive way. Like, I think about my first coaching session with a StrengthsFinder coach, and this is part of why I was so enamored with the product, was right after my first conversation with a coach. And she drew out a story where my command showed up in the most important way. And it was long before I took the assessment, because I was trying to look for evidence of it showing up in a good way, because I could only think of the bad times. I was criticizing myself. I was finding all of the history of when it showed up badly. But I remembered, I told her the story. I walked into my mother's house after her second husband died. And she collapsed into my arms, sobbing, and said, "Thank goodness you're here. Now I know everything will be okay." And that's when my command showed up. And I made sure she ate, even though she wasn't hungry. And I made sure we were hosting the people that were stopping by to offer their condolences. I made sure that my mom had what she needed because she wasn't going to ask for anything. So I think of that moment as the first piece of real evidence I have of that command showing up in a way that was exactly what it needed to be in that moment. And I'm so grateful for it because I was always trying to separate myself from that particular talent.
I think that there's so much power for all of us, men and women, to embrace the things that we naturally show up with. And if we're working against it, we're just working against ourselves.
Agreed. And that's why it's so important to have somebody walk you through this, because you can't do it on your own. I am a very good strengths coach. I'm really good at what I do, but I can't coach myself. I need somebody else. I mean, I can to some extent, of course, but you need somebody else to help you really to help you embrace it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I've coached, and you may have too. I've coached people that don't necessarily have extremely rare strengths. And so when they just look at them at face value, they're like, yeah, so what? However, when we tie that to their underlying why they're doing whatever it is that they're doing, and we tie it to the uniqueness of their career story, what are the themes and patterns of their career? How and why did they move from job to job? What motivated that? And we start to stitch together the tapestry of their story. Now, those 5 top strengths become uniquely special to them and how they apply it, as opposed to anyone else that has maybe a similar combination.
Mm-hmm. And they can actually talk about it in that way with confidence, with authenticity and confidence, and without feeling like they're bragging,
Exactly.
That's when your job is done.
Which is a whole nother topic. Showing up with executive presence while showing up with humility. And it can be done. There are tricks to that as well. But having the executive presence and the confidence and decisiveness to tell our stories is of the utmost importance to being considered the candidate of choice.
Absolutely. Gina, this has been such a pleasure. I'm so glad we finally got together on this. And listeners, you can find all of Gina's links, how to get in touch with her, how to hire her, how to follow her, how to buy her new book, hopefully in the near future.
September.
Yay, September. Okay. We'll make sure we update that page. Ping me. Because, menopause, I'll forget. So ping me when it comes out. We'll add it to the page. But it will be all the links will be at elkinsconsulting.com on the podcast page in the show notes associated with this episode. So you don't have to stop and write anything down. Just go to elkinsconsulting.com to find Gina's information. Gina, thank you. This has been such a treat.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I could talk with you about this all day long.
Oh, absolutely. I know we could. So listeners, now it's your turn. Regardless of the tool you use to self-reflect, to hold up that mirror, maybe it's time now to really decide to look at that and choose how you want to show up, who you want to be, and to identify the stories that demonstrate those qualities, those skills, those values. I really encourage you to start looking in that mirror, whatever tool you choose to use, whether it's friends and family, and asking them to honestly let you know how you appear to them, how you show up for them, or taking an assessment and then talking to a coach to walk you through it. Really encourage you. Start now. I wish I had had this tool at least 10 years ago. Thanks so much for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
That's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile just smile.